Okay, we're going to try out this whole recording thing again. Look at some factoring review for my 4U's. So we've talked about some factoring review in class. I'm just putting this more officially on some in a note so you can see it instead of just having to remember it. So there's basically 4 kinds of factoring we're working with. The first being common factoring. We talked about that in class on Tuesday. That's when you take all the terms and divide by their greatest common factor. So if I have a question like 15a cubed b squared minus 20a squared b cubed plus 5ab, we're going to look at each term and decide what they all divide by. So there's a number part they'll all divide by and a letter part they all divide by. It could be just a number, it could be just a letter, or a combination for a common factor. So if I have a common factor here, all the numbers will divide by 5. And every term has at least an a and a b in it. So my common factor is 5ab. So I'm going to turn around now and divide each term by 5ab. So 15 divided by 5 is 3. And if I take an a out of a cubed, it's a squared, and a b out of b squared is b. And I divide the next term. 20 divided by 5 is 4, and I take an a out of a squared is a, and I take a b out of b cubed is b squared. And the last term, I'm dividing by the exact same thing. So when I divide by the exact same thing, the answer will always be 1. 5 divided by 5 is 1. A divided by a is 1. B divided by b is 1. So that's common factoring. Second type of factoring has to do with trinomials. There's easy trinomial and a difficult trinomial. Easy trinomial, just like it sounds, looks like x squared, x number, with no number at the beginning. That's what makes it more simple. So all you have to do to factor that, if you've got your question, your factors will be in 2 brackets. At the beginning of each bracket is an x, because x times x is x squared. And then we need to fill numbers into our brackets such that they multiply to get the end number and add up to get the middle number. So I'm looking for 2 numbers that multiply to get negative 20 and add up to 8. So something that multiplies to get negative 20 and add up to 8 would be 10 and negative 2. And then we get into difficult trinomial. Same pattern as a simple trinomial, except there's a number at the beginning. There's 2 ways to factor difficult trinomial. You can guess and check, or you can factor by decomposition. Guess and check is exactly like it sounds. You write down your 2 brackets, and you fill them in based on your knowledge of how numbers work. So if I'm guessing and checking, I've got my 2 brackets, and I know the only thing that's going to multiply to get 2x squared is 2x and x. And then I'm looking for what multiplies to get 9. So I could put 3 and 3. And I know it has to be plus, so they either both have to be positive or both have to be negative. So I'm going to go with negative, because I know they have to add up to negative 11. So now comes the check part. So I know my 2x squared works. I'm going to do some FOIL. 2x times negative 3 is negative 6x, and negative 3 times x is negative 3x. And when I add them together, I get negative 9x, and I want negative 11. So the moral of the story is I guessed wrong. So we have to try something else. So we start again. I know the only thing to get 2x squared is 2x times x. But I can multiply 9 and 1 together to get 9. And again, I'm going to make them both negative because I know when I add them, I want them to be negative 11. So now I check. Do my FOIL. First works. Outside is negative 2x. Inside is negative 9x. I add them up, and I get negative 11x, which is what I wanted. I double check to make sure the last 2 multiply by 9, and they do. So my factors are 2x minus 9 and x minus 1. So that's guessing and checking. If we want to do decomposition, if we want to do decomposition, if you're not strong with your times tables or doing numbers or doing calculations in your head, decomposition is nice because it gives you a structure to coming up with factors. So if I decompose something, I keep the beginning and the end the same, and I break the middle up. I decompose it into two things that will add up to negative 11. So I could do something like negative, whoops, can't do that. So before I come up with what I decompose, I've got to do one important thing. Multiply the first and last numbers together. So in this case, it's 2 times 9 is 18. Now I can come up with what I want to decompose. I'm going to look for two numbers that multiply to get 18 and add to get negative 11. So two numbers that multiply to get negative 18 would be 9 and 2, and 9 and 2 add to get 11. If I make them both negative, they'll add up to negative 11. So the next step, once I come up with those numbers, is to actually decompose the middle term. Once I decompose the middle term, I group the first two together, and I group the last two together, and I common factor. So if I look at my first group, the common factor is 2x. When I divide, I'm left with x minus 1. I group the second two together, my common factor is minus 9, and I end up with x minus 1. You must always end up with the same factor in the brackets. So you want to always have the same bracket. If not, you've done something wrong. And then it's really a matter of treating that bracket like a common factor, just like we were doing in class today. So we common factor x minus 1 out of that. 2x is left. And we common factor x minus 1 out of this. Minus 9 is left. So there's our factors, x minus 1 and 2x minus 9, by decomposing. And last but not least is difference of squares. So we know difference of squares because it only has two terms, and it will always be subtracting. So when we're factoring difference of squares, we know that the brackets are exactly the same, except one is adding and one is subtracting. And if you're not sure what the numbers are, you should be able to square root them to be difference of squares. And the square root of 49 is 7. So it's plus 7 and minus 7. That's our factoring review. Your job is to be able to pick out the different kinds of factoring and successfully factor them. So there are 3, I believe. Yep, there are 3 examples. This is where you're going to pause the video and you're going to try to do the factoring, and then we'll check them together. So you should hit pause now and try to do the factoring. If you're listening now, that means you will have hit pause and tried to factor on your own. This is what it should have looked like. This is a simple trinomial or an easy trinomial because there's no number in front of the x squared. We look for two numbers that multiply to get negative 15 and add to get negative 2. So my factors, x times x is x squared, minus 5 and plus 3 multiply to get negative 15 and add up to negative 5. For the next one, it's actually a difference of squares. There's only 2 terms and there's subtracting in the middle, and 25 and 4 are both perfect squares. So we'll have exactly the same factors. One will be plus, one will be minus. So the square root of 25 is 5. I need y plus 2x and 5y minus 2x. And last but not least, nice little difficult trinomial. Since there's a number in front of the x squared, makes it more difficult. You can guess and check, or you can do decomposition, whatever you are most comfortable with. I think I'm going to do decomposition here, just to help people remember how to do it. So if we do decomposition, we have to do 6 times negative 4. It's negative 24. So I want two numbers that multiply to negative 24 and add up to the middle, negative 5. So I keep my first term, I keep my end term, and I decompose the middle term. So I would say that negative 8 plus 3 will multiply to negative 24 and add up to negative 5. So negative 8x plus 3x. And then we group. First two, last two, look for common factors. So the common factor in the first two is 2x. So we'd have 3x minus 4 when I divide by 2x. And the common factor in the second two is 1. And that leaves me with the same bracket. So I'm good. So that bracket becomes a common factor. And the other factor is 2x minus 1. I have posted a sheet with a mixture of factoring questions on it with answers. You can try that if you would like some more review.